Hello everyone, hello comrades. Before I start, I'd like to recognise the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here with us today. It's such a pleasure to be back with my tribe. I haven't been spending too much time recently with unionists, and it's very comfortable for me to feel like I'm coming home. So thanks for the invitation to Trades Hall. So really what I'm going to do with you today is walk you through the issues that were kind of raised in that video. It's not easy, but I really want you to think about the fact that it's never been easy. The union movement's never taken on just the easy issues. The union movement's the one body, the one movement that takes on the hardest of hardest issues. And I think the only way that we're going to lead a progressive response to this is if the trade union movement in this country leads this out, as it has done on so many other major health and safety issues. So I'm really going to take you through this question of what does it mean to have a safe and inclusive workplace, and what does safety look like? Is it the same for everyone? And if not, why not? And I'm going to step you through some of these concepts and step you then through your role as HSRs and what you can do, because you have a lot of power to be able to make a change in this area. So, yeah, I'm very conscious as well that I'm spending my life at the moment dealing with these concepts in a lot of detail, a bit nerdy, but yeah. So I'm hoping I'm not too technical in the going through of this, but let's just step our way through. So, as Will said, my research is focusing on regulation and how we prevent gendered violence at work. So currently, our major focus when we're talking about gender-based violence, the only real issue that gets dealt with kind of at anywhere near sort of a more comprehensive level is sexual harassment. That's the one subject that people kind of get, you shouldn't do. And you've got anti-discrimination laws that say you shouldn't do it, and that there are penalties if you do it. But that's the point. The point is it's after the fact. Somebody has to have experienced it. Someone has to be brave enough then to make a complaint about it. Someone then needs to go through the system designed to deal with that complaint, which is completely awful and demoralising and further injures the person. And then at the end of that, the sort of remedies for it are very, very small amounts potentially of monetary amounts if you get through the whole system, and it can be years later when you get through that. Now, we've really got to rethink that as a model, because we are not preventing it from happening, we're responding to it after the fact. We're asking individuals to deal with it by themselves, and we're asking people who've already been injured by something that's happened in the workplace to deal with it by themselves, and only to deal with it from the point of view of seeking some compensation if they've experienced it and if they've been damaged enough to get compensation. So we need to front end this conversation. And so obviously when we start, we think, okay, if we have an injury of workers at work, where do we normally look? We normally look to health and safety law and to the role of HSRs, the role of union delegates in the workplace. So why is it that we haven't had this kind of approach in the past? Why is it that it's 2017 that WorkSafe Victoria acknowledged gender-based violence as a workplace health and safety issue? So 2017, the 21st century. But let me point out to you, WorkSafe Victoria is well ahead of the game compared to other regulators around the country on this issue. For example, in this recent national inquiry on sexual harassment, the West Australian Workplace Health and Safety Regulator actually wrote to the Federal Sex Discrimination Commissioner and said, thanks very much for your invitation for us to make a submission, but this is not our issue. And we don't have the resources to deal with it. Go and talk to the Equal Opportunity Commissioner about it. So they actually put on record that they didn't see it as their remit to deal with it. So my research is really looking at this question about why have we failed to find an appropriate response, and where might we look to an appropriate response. And one of the kind of areas that people have started to think about is, can we bring together the ideas of discrimination law and health and safety law to find something that's at the crossroads here, that actually uses the prevention framework from health and safety, but also builds into that the understanding that this is a slightly more complicated question because it actually has to deal with the issues of discrimination and inequality, as well as deal with how it manifests through a health and safety issue at the workplace. So that's what I'm really having a look at. So, as Will said, the International Labour Organisation has recently adopted a new convention, which is a fabulous thing when you have a new convention, because it's a new standard that says internationally we believe this is what all workers, the rights that all workers should experience. And that convention, which I'll speak about a bit later, is on violence and harassment in the world of work. But it has a specific focus within it on gender-based violence, and it defines gender-based violence as meaning violence and harassment directed at a person because of their sex or gender, or affecting a person of a particular sex or gender disproportionately, and it includes sexual harassment. So the really important thing for us here in Australia is not just that it recognised gender-based violence as a specific form of violence and harassment that needed to be dealt with, but it also recognises that it goes beyond sexual harassment. That's not the only form. That we need to look at non-sexual forms of gender-based violence also. Trades Hall has been dealing with a more detailed definition, which really gets to the heart of the matter. It really gets to this thing that what this is really about, what gender-based violence is really about, is power and control in the workplace. It's about inequality. It's about inequality between men and women. It's about inequality between people who might express their sexuality differently. It's about inequalities associated with how people present themselves. And it's about dealing with this concept that we have really standardised and somewhat wrong views about what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman at two ends of a spectrum. And that's damaging for everyone, both men and women, because for men, gender-based violence often presents itself as if you are not masculine enough, if you don't present in the dominant way in the workplace, if you don't like watching pornography and that's a cultural phenomenon in your workplace, you are demeaned because you're not man enough. And for women, often it's about the fact that you're commented on all the time about your looks, what you could do, what your role in society is, what your place in the workplace is, and it's not to lead, it's not to be in powerful positions and the like. So it's damaging for everyone, and so it's something that we need to deal with. Up until relatively recently, people weren't identifying clearly that it was something that really injured workers. So many of you have been HSRs for a while, you might have noticed this shift that's gone away from seeing violence as being just physical violence, and you've gone to psychosocial, an understanding of psychosocial violence and its impacts. And that is exactly the case here with gender-based violence as well. That people kind of understand the concept of physical harm, but don't necessarily understand the concept of other forms of harm. But we now know that it does do it. Over the last number of, 5 or so years in Victoria, the Victoria Equal Opportunity Commission has been investigating Victoria Police at their invitation and looking with them about the practices in that culture, that very macho, very dominated sort of way of being, one way of being a copper, and the culture that created, and what the impact was that. And they documented in very, very uncomfortable detail the impact, including things, as you see in the video, like suicide, like people leaving the workplace, like people not being able to work again. And so we know there's substantial impacts from this type of violence and harassment. It impacts on the individuals. It also impacts on their co-workers and observers. As I said before, it's about power and control. And it's about culture and what works to control people. So people learn very quickly, you don't step out of the mark. You don't put your head up. You don't challenge sexist jokes because you get knocked down if you're one of the ones challenging. You don't report anything if you don't see people being treated well if they report things. So it's not just the person who's experiencing the violence and harassment that are injured, but it's also co-workers. That creates a sense of anxiety in people. It creates a sense of concern in people. Too much time is often spent probably on the business case for dealing with the issues. I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time on a business case. It should be enough that workers are injured and therefore we should stop it. But there is a clear business case in terms of the costs associated with it. But that business case also extends to not just the loss of skilled workers, but the fact that you don't attract skilled workers, that women are not working in industries where they could be working and offering their skills because they're excluded, because it's not seen as a place for women. It's not seen as a place that's equal for women. And as a result of that, also society is actually losing. We're losing good people who could be in the workforce, who are not in the workforce. We're having to pay for the costs of workers who have been injured, who need social services and supports. And, you know, in some places, it's been documented that this sort of violence, because it undermines really people's logic and idea about what it means to be a person, it can actually end the rule of law in some countries where you don't have a sense of this commitment to equality and a sense of well-being for all people. So there's a substantial impact, and so we've got the case for seeing it as a health and safety matter. It happens at work. It injures workers. It is a health and safety matter. How do we address it? Well, easier said than done, of course. Otherwise, I wouldn't be spending 3 years of my life investigating this thing. First of all, we have to acknowledge it. The first thing is we have to see it. So this is the starting point for all of you. Some of you will know it already. Some of you will have experienced it in your own lives. But we have to address it. It's not an easy thing to address, but I don't want people to be overwhelmed by it. It's not easy to address because it's usually people who are the most vulnerable who experience it, and it's also because it reflects the inequality that's going on around us. So we have a problem, particularly in this country, with gender, for example, gender inequality. We have one of the most sex-segregated workforces in the world. We have really, really high rates of underutilisation of women in our labour market compared to other kind of developed countries. We've got the highest levels of precarious employment, and particularly women in precarious employment. So we've got a lot of sort of problems that are quite big out there in terms of how we treat women and men in this country and how we see equality in this country. So one point you could say, oh, it's too hard, we can't start this problem because you have to start out here with the rest of society before we can deal with our workplaces. But we know that's not right. As a trade union movement, we know that's not right. And as health and safety people, you know that's not right. You know that you can lead the other way out. You know that you can lead from dealing with it at a workplace level, and you can create a movement around this that will create societal change, and that's where we're starting today. As I said, the problem that we've got here is that we have our regulatory response, so our laws at the moment don't deal with this very well. We have an anti-discrimination framework that doesn't offer anything at the prevention level and offers very little even as a response to people who've actually experienced gender-based violence. We have comprehensive workplace health and safety law, and it covers the area of violence at work, but that law has never really been deployed systemically to gender-based violence. And our Fair Work laws, and we know, I know that you know, that there's lots of limitations in our Fair Work law, but unless the sort of experience of gender-based violence can be characterised as bullying, our law doesn't really deal with it. Unless, for example, we can get a collective agreement to include a clause around gender-based violence. And then if that's the case, a person who's experienced it has the ability to take a claim through the dispute settlement procedure in your agreements. But also we could put obligations on the employer to prevent gender-based violence and take steps to prevent it, which means that the union, for example, could take a dispute that the organisation is not doing those things. Those are options at the moment. It seems to me we need to explore all of those options, but the one that's sort of sitting and staring at us in the face as the most kind of already ready to go is the workplace health and safety. It's there. We don't have to change law. We don't have to change regulation. We just have to change mindsets as seeing this as a health and safety problem and start working on that framework. As I said, the International Labour Organisation has seen this as a problem this year and has adopted a new convention. Now, for all of you who've been dealing with violence in the workplace as an occupational issue, you should see this as a celebration because it's a convention, Convention 190, which is on the elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work. That's all forms of violence and harassment. So it's really interesting that it took till the 2nd century of the ILO's work and the 21st century before we have a violence and harassment convention out of the United Nations sort of agency for work. And that's largely because violence has been seen as a private matter, not as a public issue. So violence has been characterised as something that happens between two individuals and one person behaving badly and needs to be sorted out between them. Right? And that's the legacy around violence generally. So it's taken us this long to even get to the point where people go, hang on a minute, violence is not just an issue between the two people that experience it or how it happens, and doesn't just happen that way. The systems and processes of work, the conditions of work can create violence as well. And so we have now an international standard that recognises that and it defines gender-based violence, and it places obligations on governments to adopt it and to put in place measures to ensure that at the workplace level it's both prevented and responded to. So the world out there is telling us all that this is the right thing, this is the right issue, it's the right time. There's lots on our side in terms of taking this issue up at the moment. I wanted to say, before I go from that, red button means go back. Yep, good. The convention itself is really, really helpful for many of the issues that you would experience as unionists as well out there, because it actually doesn't frame the rights that come under the convention around being an employee. It frames the rights around being a worker. And it doesn't mean that you actually have to be an employee. So it doesn't talk about only being available for employees. It's for anyone who's at work. This is a really, really interesting template and a new development from the ILO, which is really useful when we're also thinking about how we frame our broader workplace laws and moving away from it just being associated with an employment relationship. As we know, there's more and more people being precariously employed. They are more and more vulnerable. They're more and more likely to experience violence and harassment in the workplace because of their vulnerability. And so the convention sort of really addresses that by saying, well, this doesn't matter if you're an employee or not, it just matters that it happens at work. And work is very broadly defined. It's not the workplace, it's work in the world of work. So it does cover commuting arrangements, and the like also. Okay, so how do we approach this from a workplace health and safety lens? Okay, the first thing that you need to do is to identify and understand that it's a serious health and safety hazard in every workplace. The data now is out there. For example, the most recent survey, just on that issue of sexual harassment from the Australian Human Rights Commission, said that in some industries it's up to 81% of people have experienced sexual harassment in the last 5 years. The Trades Hall's own research tells us it's endemic across Victoria. 64% of women had experienced it at work. Only 17% of those people who were surveyed in the Human Rights Commission's survey had reported it. So that's very few people who are reporting it. And only a third of those who witnessed it did anything about it. So we've got a really big bystander issue as well. We've got people seeing it happening to people, and we've got no interventions occurring, and we've got no reporting, people who are experiencing not reporting it. So no pressure on organisations to deal with it. So the first thing is, I think we have to work on the basis that it will be there, it'll be in every workplace. There's no exclusion here. It's not a blue-collar issue, it's not a white-collar issue, it's both an issue. It's not just where women predominate, it's where women and men are. It's not just directed at women, although the majority of people who experience it are women, and the majority of people who experience it are women, and it's perpetuated by men, although that's not exclusively the case. So we should just work on the basis that it's likely in every workplace to be there. So you need a plan to respond to it, like you do with any other hazard at work. You need to assess what are the risks in your own organisation about it. And you need to remove or minimise those risks, as you do with all your other health and safety hazards. And you need to act to eliminate it if you can. So the first thing is to understand that it's not just the acts of a few aberrant individuals. Quite often it's paid off as that. It's like boys will be boys, or those boys, or that man who had dementia, that's the way they act, or those sorts of things. There's ample evidence to suggest now, to demonstrate that there are systemic drivers of it. And we can eradicate gender-based violence by addressing the risks associated with it. A workplace culture that tolerates or promotes sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic or other discriminating attitudes or behaviours is a risk. Violence and aggressive behaviour that is supported, accepted, rewarded, not addressed, creates risks. Facilities and equipment that don't meet the needs of staff, for example, inadequate uniform or no appropriate toilet facilities for women, or gender-neutral bathrooms for transgender people, creates risk. Offensive material in the workplace, for example, pornography, sexist or homophobic items, calendars, magazines, posters, clothing, novelty acts, risks. Workplaces which serve alcohol, for example, licensed venues such as pubs and restaurants, we know risks there. Work functions where alcohol is served and tolerated, we know risks. Understand them, plan from them. Don't deal with them after the fact. The way work is designed and managed is a problem. Where roles and positions are strongly gender segregated, for example, where all of the administrative staff are women and all of the technical or operational staff are men, is a risk. Management styles or workplace cultures and behaviours that exclude or disrespect some workers, for example, when decisions are made or workplace bonding happens at the expense of others and outside of the formal work structures, like at the pub or at lunch or in the men's toilets, are risks. Workplace leaders who are unable to adequately recognise and respond to incidents of gender violence, risk. lack of appropriate reporting mechanisms for workers experiencing gendered violence, risk. Workplace leaders who don't consult with workers and show little commitment to health and safety for all staff, risks. So we can identify it. So this idea that it's too hard, it's part of society and it's not our responsibility to address society's problems in the workplace, or it's too hard to do it. The work is being done to identify how you can plan for, identify the risks in your workplace and respond to those things. And that work is being done by Victorian Trades Hall Council and the women's team at Victorian Trades Hall Council. And it is world-leading work and you should be utilising it, because it will go down as the beginning of a movement, a change, and a change that needs to happen. And it's one, I think, that Trades Hall has spent quite a bit of time working with WorkSafe Victoria about, and I feel that there is a level of understanding growing there as well. So we are at the beginning of something very exciting happening. So, in conclusion then, just looking through things, the thing that I'd like you to take away from this is this: that you understand, even if you don't understand gender-based violence fully yourself, that's fine. I still have moments where it's clear in my head and then the next day I read something else and I go, not quite sure about that. So it's okay, but what we want you to do is take away the idea that it is there and that it's a serious occupational health and safety hazard that injures Victorian workers every day. It's not just something that naughty people do, the aberrant behaviour of a few individuals. There is ample evidence to demonstrate that it's systemic, it's at too high levels for it just to be a few bad eggs doing this stuff. There's too much of it to just write it off as a few problem people. The third thing is that we can eradicate it by addressing the risks associated with it. If you work on the basis that you understand that it's a problem in your workplace and that you need a plan to deal with it, just start there. What's our plan? Planning to have a plan. Having a conversation about it. How has our Health and Safety Committee going to address this issue is a good way forward. It's been globally recognised as a problem. You've got a lot of weight behind you taking up this issue. There's a lot of authoritative weight saying that this is the problem that we need to address, one of the biggest problems that we need to address in our workplaces. The new ILO Convention provides a framework for review and on how we can approach it. And workplace health and safety at the moment is our kind of best foot forward at this stage for dealing with it. It's not going to solve all of the problems, but it's one of the sort of tranches that we need to be utilising to stop workers from being injured at work in this way. So that's what I'd like to say about it. I hope you can sort of at least be thoughtful about it, take it away and think about it. It usually raises a little bit of controversy, this topic, and that's not unusual. We are challenging everything we know about who we are and how we are in the world when we're dealing with this issue in some respects. But we are unionists. We fight for workers' rights and we fight against workers being injured at work. And if unions and health and safety representatives are not taking up this issue, no one will. Thanks very much.